everybody wants to get united. Like, what we gotta do is meet everybody on 149th Street at the bench.
Do you guys remember these markers? These used to be like the top-notch go-to markers back in the day, and you don't see them around anywhere anymore. So in today's video, I kind of want to talk about some of the tools of the trade from back from the 70s all the way till now, because a lot's changed and a lot's going to continue to change as the years progress. In the early 70s, a new subculture was born in the streets of New York, pioneered by artists like Taki183, who became famous for catching tags around the city. At that time, the very few graffiti artists that did exist would use whatever markers that they could possibly find and paintbrushes to actually take their tags. As you might imagine, markers were a lot more practical, so they became a lot more popular amongst graffiti artists. By 1971, writers like Blade and Coco were rushing the trains with whatever tools they can find. And inside subway cars, markers really reigned supreme. But during these early days of graffiti, markers weren't specialized for tagging just yet. They still had relatively small nibs that didn't cover a massive surface. By 1971, the popularization of the pilot marker saw a huge surge due to their massive nibs. These allowed your tags to be seen very easily and dominate a large amount of space within the subway car, or whatever you were tagging for that matter. Now, I remember having both a pilot marker and a Magnum 44, but both of them, once you broke that nib in, it was so satisfying because all that ink would get juiced up on the softened nib and give you really satisfying tags. We also began to see the uprising of de-rusto spray paint, and people began to get creative, making their own mops, where they would stuff the felt from a blackboard eraser into an empty bottle, or some people would use deodorant or any other kind of container that could fit that pretty comfortably. And they'd even use shoe polish to make DIY inks. Now, I remember working back at the shop, Demer used to actually collect canceled spray paint brands and canceled spray paint colors. I can't remember off the top of my head like the specific ones that he had, but he had plenty of decommissioned spray cans mounted high up inside the shop. And I remember as a kid, my dad actually kind of taught me and my brother how to make our own homemade mops. I don't know if this conversation was intentional or if he was kind of just telling a story about his days doing graffiti, but I remember him talking about making mops and using a Flowmaster ink. Now, where markers reigned supreme inside the trains, outside on the streets, spray paint became the ultimate tool. Hardware store cans like Rust-Oleum and Krylon were the most popular amongst graffiti artists. But back then, we didn't have the variety of caps that we have nowadays. Old school writers used to grab caps off of the old easy off cleaner and use that as a bit of a fat cap for their cans. And all of this was at the expense of the hardware stores or paint stores, because racking at this point in time was a huge part of doing graffiti. At this point in graffiti's lifespan, if you weren't stealing your paint, then you weren't really considered a real graffiti artist. You weren't considered a real writer. Stealing your paint was part of the culture. It was part of what you did. It was expected. And when you think of it, when you look at the demographic that was doing it at the time, it was predominantly people that were younger who didn't have the money for these large-scale pieces that they were doing. So if you wanted to get the paint, you didn't have any other choice other than to go ahead and steal it. The 1980s saw graffiti go full color and reach its creative peak. Writers like Futura, Blade, and Dondi were painting elaborate murals on city walls and trains. The tools of the trade also expanded, but many of the old favorites at this point still remained. For example, Rusto and Krylon still dominated, but crews often stuck with what they trusted. Bargain cans like Rollocate and 99-cent hardware store paint, as well as the Red Devil cans, were pretty much a last resort. Where we saw a real big upheaval of the tools for the trade was with markers, where markers began to get a lot wider. And this is where we get to the mini wide and the uni wide. I had actually bought these for my father for his birthday a few years back, because I remember him talking about these my entire childhood. Like my entire childhood, my dad was like, the uni wide, the mini wide, these were the markers I use, they're the best markers ever. Shut up about your crinks, shut up about this and that. It's all about the uni wide, mini wide. It was hard to find, but I managed to find one of each, and I got them both for him, along with some Flowmaster ink as well, which that one was really difficult to find nowadays. One big game changer was the fact that we also began to see the introduction of refillable acrylic pens. Writers often soaked tips in in-house brand inks like Flowmaster, and all of this brought a level of customization to graffiti that had not yet been there. It allowed you to take your ink and give it more staying power, or it allowed you just to simply mix different colors together. It also made graffiti a little bit more accessible because getting blackboard erasers was not hard. I mean, my brother and I even made our own markers the exact same way. I had a thing of Old Spice and a marker, you know, a felt thing shoved into it, and it worked just fine. Now, this video is brought to you guys by the artistblock.inc, our art store. Check out our How to Do Graffiti book in the description down below. It'll teach you everything you need to know about all of graffiti's fundamentals. It's the only only book on the market that holds your hand and walks you step by step through learning graffiti, making the process stress-free and as easy as it can possibly be. With hundreds of illustrations, making it very easy to follow for new graffiti artists and experienced writers alike, but also in-depth enough to teach even the most seasoned of graffiti artists something new. Check it out in the description. We have digital ebooks on our online store, theartistblock.inc, with physical copies over on Amazon. By the 1990s, graffiti had gone global, and the toolset was evolving fast. Brands began to tailor to graffiti artists, making new products specifically targeted to graffiti artists and writers alike. In Spain, Montana Colors launched in 1994 with Montana Hardcore, spray cans specifically built for graffiti. They had vibrant, beautiful colors with high opacity, but more importantly, these cans had the first female threaded valves, and came with special caps as well. Suddenly, many of the markers became refillable, allowing us to add our own ink and new colors into our markers that we didn't have access to before. At this point, graffiti began to really expand and get larger. Crews were larger. Crews were doing bigger murals as well. And in these instances, it wasn't always feasible to rack all that paint. So crews would pool all their money together in hopes to either buy the paint that they couldn't rack or to buy all of the paint that they needed. If anything, this was one of the benefits of being in a crew, was the fact that you had other people to help chip in to get paint. And racking was still very much the norm at this point. Granted, it happened a lot less, but it was still much more prevalent than it is nowadays. In the 2000s, graffiti and tools for it became an entire industry in and of itself. Within a few years, the Montana 94 line would arrive in 2009 to push the quality of spray paint even higher. When the Montana 94s came out, they came out with like 140 something different colors, and these were low pressure cans with faster drying times, making them really ideal for anybody that wanted to do some, bigger, high detail work where they needed multiple layers. And this is something I in particular remember because I was still working at the graffiti store at that time, and I remember getting the 94s for the first time. And I could tell you from firsthand experience, customers were excited to see it. They saw it on the shelves and immediately went for it. There was no hesitation. You're telling me I can get Montana, but better? And I don't remember what we were selling the hardcores versus the 94s for. I think the hardcores, if memory serves me right, was around $5, and the 94s were like 6 or 7, but I forget. I want to say Belton that we sold was like $8. But you gotta forgive me, it's been like almost, holy crap, it's been almost 20 years. There's no way it's been almost that long since I worked at the shop. My math has to be off. My math can't be right. And at some point, I don't remember when, we got the Nitro 2G cans, and that had the best black in history. I don't care what other black was out at that time, Nitro 2G was just so nice. It was buttery. The thing was as opaque as it could possibly be. A perfect black. There might be better stuff nowadays, but that can back then was beautiful. And Sabotage paint also came out somewhere around this time, and that thing was rancid. It smelled god awful. I remember I had a friend who literally got arrested because the cops smelled what they described as a foul odor they thought was death. They thought something had died, and they looked for where the smell was coming from and found my friend doing graffiti. But it was a smell that would kind of grow on you, after using it for a little bit. It would kind of grow on you. Now, the pens used for graffiti as well as the markers, those really began to advance very quickly. German Molotow and Dutch Grog markers gained popularity worldwide, and your boy here loved Grog. The Grog ink specifically was awesome. More mainstream brands around this time also faded away. Krylon and Rust-Oleum got a little bit harder to access and harder to find in big cities, as they began to get replaced by specialty brands like Belton and Montana. Even so, and this is kind of a weird shift in graffiti that I remember seeing while working at the shop, but technology began to play more of a role in the process of graffiti as well, where before, we used to legitimately practice our pieces in the dark. Like if we knew that there was a wall we were gonna hit and we were doing a piece that we didn't have muscle memorized, we would try to get as much of it muscle memorized as possible, because we didn't want to carry the sketch on ourselves, as if we got caught, that was more evidence. Now don't get me wrong, you might still carry just the sketch, but you aren't carrying your whole black book. You would try not to carry the sketch if you can help it, but sometimes you needed to. Regardless, we still would practice muscle memorizing certain parts of our piece, if not the whole thing. But with phones coming out, people would just snap a picture of their piece on their phone and just keep it with them. It was easy enough to delete it if you needed to, but at least you had it there. Also with phones, you had at least a little bit of light, and granted that light might give you away, it might make you a little bit more visible, but it also allowed you to see. And it wasn't nearly as bright as carrying a massive flashlight or a headlamp on top of your dome in order order to see what you were doing. So I legit would paint with people, and they would have, you know, their cell phone like this as they paint a line. And yeah, that's what some people were doing. It's also around this time where I began to see Demmer specifically move from Polaroid pictures of his pieces that he would do, and he would be, I was too broke at the time to afford Polaroids. Those were expensive, alright? If you were alive at that time, you know they were expensive. They still are. But he would move from Polaroid to a digital little camera. So there was this more like shift from the more tactile nature of graffiti to a more digital nature of graffiti around this time. Today's graffiti artists have pretty much every single tool at their disposal. High-end graffiti brands fill online shops. And old DIY tactics kind of fused into modern-day technology. Some of it practical, some of it not so much, but still a shit. Montana and Molotov still pretty much set the standard for the quality of spray paint out there. But some writers still cherish the more vintage stock, with a few people still hunting for those classic Krylon 90s cans. Markers span the spectrum nowadays, from ultra-fine Sakura Pigma pens for tagging to thick pump-action squeeze markers to refillable brush markers. Some people have even begun to 3D print their own spray paint caps, which is wild to me. Like, that just would never even process in my head. And I think that kind of thing is awesome, because I physically remember my brother and I walking over an hour to the hardware store just to go ahead and rack caps. And back then, you would make sure that you would make the caps last. You would try to preserve them as much as possible. One tool that I particularly loved was my scribe. It's got a metal tip there that's able to really easily cut into surfaces with no problem at all, giving you a tag that lasts a lot longer than the average ink tag would. And these come in a wide variety. But back when I used to get up, an absolute must-have. I gotta see if I can find some of the markers that I used to use back in the day, because man, there were so many. I remember the OTR Purple Metallic was my favorite marker when the shop first opened. But then I had some etch cream, and etch cream is nasty work. It is it is diabolical. And I remember that was given to me by a good friend, Top 5. I don't know why he gave it to me. He just showed up in the shop. He was like, "Here, man, this is all yours." And I'm like, I'm not gonna argue. You know, that thing was really, really good. Regardless, nowadays, spray paint is so good and such a high quality, and there's so many brands out there that it can be difficult to figure out which one you want to get. And when new graffiti artists ask me, "Hey John, what's the best spray paint out there? What should I, you know, invest in?" My answer is always the same. If you're tight on money, get the cheapest stuff you can find. It's all gonna be solid quality. Because even if we're not looking at the premium brands and we're looking at like hardware store paint, stuff that isn't specialty made for graffiti, that paint is still really good a lot of times. There's some that are lackluster, but remember, any of these non-specialty spray paints are still going to be higher quality than the stuff that they were rocking in the 70s. And we all see the work that they were doing in the 70s is beautiful. So at that point, it's really just a matter of control and knowledge. If you have good control, you can control the paint. If you have good knowledge of graffiti and its fundamentals, then your letters are gonna look good, and if your paint is watery or it's drippy or whatever the case is, no one's gonna hold that against the actual letters themselves, because they see that the letters are sick, they see that the piece is dope, they see the hand style is nice. Now granted, it might be easier to wash off, it might be easier to buff, whatever the case is, but let's be honest, even with the premium stuff, if they want it off the wall, it's coming off the wall. So when we begin to look at the more premium brands that are specialty made for graffiti, all of that paint is going to be great. Really what you're selecting here is the color selection and what kind of colors you want, because most of the brands are going to be pretty similar in quality with very little difference. Even when you get the most expensive paint out there, it's high quality, sure, don't get me wrong, but is it like $5 more high quality than the next premium brand? Maybe not. So that's my advice. Don't break the bank over premium brands. They're all pretty good and they'll all get the job done, especially if you're using it just for tagging and throwies. If you're using it for tagging and throwies, then you really don't need the top shelf stuff. But dudes, let me know some of the stuff that you guys used to use, or some of the stuff that you're currently using in graffiti. Leave that in the comments down below, because I know we get attached to our tools, man. Some of us get really attached to our markers. So if you got a favorite marker, let me know, you know, what it is and why. On that note, if you guys want to learn how to do graffiti, you want to find your style, check out our book in the description down below. It's the only book that teaches you all the fundamentals, and it's got hundreds of illustrations to go with every single lesson, making it easy to follow for brand new graffiti artists and in-depth enough for experienced writers to still learn something. Check it out. In the description, we have digital ebooks on our online store, theartistblock.inc, with physical copies over on Amazon. And then we have an amazing How to Do Graffiti playlist right up here with more graffiti content right down here. And I'll catch you guys back here next week. Thanks for watching.